Jeremy.
On this episode of Old Joe's Reminiscence, when a space satellite comes down near a lonely desert town, it carries with it a deadly virus previously unknown to humankind. The 1971 film The Andromeda Strain is based on a 1969 novel by Michael Crichton, his first to be published under his own name, not a pseudonym. I first saw The Andromeda Strain when I'd attended high school, ninth grade to be exact, during the 1972 to 73 year. The school gathered our entire student body, grades 9 through 12, into an auditorium to show us this very movie. I was 13, an established sci-fi nut when it came to books, movies, and television, so this was right up my alley. I was surprised to see the scene showing a woman's exposed breasts. It's not that I minded. I wasn't scarred for life or anything. I'd seen a few magazines. It just struck me as odd that they would show it in school. It got me to wondering how the film had received its G rating. But there are many odd ratings from those early years. Several Andromeda Strain movie posters included a warning indicating that some content may not be suitable for children. My only complaint? The film seems a bit slow and tedious at certain points. Later, I read the novel by Michael Crichton when I'd found a copy in a thrift store in the mid-1980s. I've seen The Andromeda Strain on TV many times since then. I have a VHS tape of it, recorded from cable TV, and I've seen the 2008 miniseries remake. Have you seen The Andromeda Strain? If not, I'd suggest that you watch the film now, because I'm going to examine it under a high-powered microscope and cut it to pieces during my in-depth analysis coming up. Producer-director Robert Wise had won Oscars for West Side Story and The Sound of Music. He was also nominated for Best Film Editing for Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. But he's probably best known to sci-fi fans for his work on the equally long and slow-moving Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Universal Pictures paid $250,000 for the film rights when the novel was published in 1969. When it was suggested that they replace one of the book's male leads with a female scientist, Robert Wise was worried. He imagined her being no more than eye candy, sort of like Raquel Welch was in Fantastic Voyage. Kate Reed was cast, and his worries had been unfounded. Boy, were they unfounded. With a hefty production budget of $6.5 million, The Andromeda Strain was a financial success, grossing $12.3 million in North America. The feature begins with an acknowledgement screen, giving it the appearance of a real-life documentary film. Seeing the opening credits, I'm reminded that the special effects were designed by Douglas Trumbull of 2001: A Space Odyssey fame, and should I mention The Star Lost? The film is supposed to depict events that occur over a period of 4 days in early 1971. It opens with a day-for-night scene of a man on a hill using an infrared scope. He's Lieutenant Sean, played by Mark Jenkins. He started on-screen acting in 1968, and he heads the University of Washington's professional actor training program. He climbs into a van. A rotating dish antenna pops up through the roof. The scenes of Piedmont, Arizona in this film were shot at Shafter, Texas, near the Mexican border. In that van, U.S. Air Force Sergeant Crane zeroes in on a locating beacon. The sergeant is played by Canadian-born Peter Helm, who seemed to drop from the screen scene shortly after filming this picture. They get out for another look at the town, and the lieutenant lights up a smoke. From their hilltop vantage point, he notices a group of buzzards flying around.
I didn't notice them before.
The town looks dead. We cut to Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The duty watch officer looks bored, continuing to read a magazine while monitoring the signals from Piedmont. He is Lieutenant Cumrow, played by Carl Reindel. He was a popular choice to play military personnel. Four men in an adjacent office perk up when they hear the men in the band start to describe what they see in the town.
It's kind of spooky.
They report that there's no sign of life, and Sergeant Crane says he sees a body. Everybody starts paying close attention when the band's tires squeal. Lieutenant Cumrow asks what's going on.
Are you certain, Caper One?
The lieutenant pulls out an orders book and says,
Proceed to satellite and retrieve.
All of the other guys are starting to stare at him. A few begin to get out of their chairs, but they're told to stay at their stations and hit a security button. Lieutenant Cumrow places a call to Major Manchek. Tires squeal again. A large part of the scene's suspense is the fact that we're only listening. Without visual cues, our imaginations can run away unchecked. I'm fairly certain that I imagined an alien being the first time I saw this scene. One of the men yells. There's a thud, and then silence. Major Manchek places a call to request a flyby. Major Manchek is played by Raymond Beery, who I recognize as Inspector Berchi in the Numbered for Death episode of Search, and as Elijah Crow from the 1981 Western series Reincarnation of Brett Maverick. I don't understand his pilot's assignment, nor the comment about him being crocked. You'd think they'd have planes and pilots ready on standby, set to go at a moment's notice. An F-4 Phantom flies low and slow for surveillance footage. The word Prossex on the door struck me as odd. An error? A deliberate misspelling? I tried to look it up, and after wading through half a dozen porn video sites and listings for espresso shops, I eventually discovered that Prossex is a chemical used in film processing. Major Manchek orders a lockdown and complete secrecy. He enters a room labeled emergency only. He has a key marked in case of fire, notify Division 21, emergency only. He puts that key in an emergency telephone and dials a number from memory. He gets a recording. Then he states who he is and that he's recommending a wildfire alert. Next, we see a teletype printout about the alert. Once the teletype finishes, we cut to what appears to be a lavish house party, complete with waitstaff. The doorbell rings and a woman opens the door to see two men in uniforms. MP Captain Morton says, "We'd like to see Dr. Jeremy Stone, please." Captain Morton is played by busy character actor John Carter. Mrs. Stone is played by an uncredited Susan Brown. She's known for playing in a lot of westerns and soap operas. She notices a soldier pacing by a limo with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Captain Morton insists that Dr. Stone be called to the door.
Please call Dr. Stone to the door.
The MP with him, played by Michael Bowe, adds,
"Otherwise, we'll go get him, ma'am."
She agrees to go for her husband. When she tries to close the door, the MP pushes it open. The captain removes his cover, steps in, and says,
"I'll just wait here, Matt."
Mrs. Stone interrupts her husband's conversation and tells him that some Army types are there. They're actually Air Force, but I'll cut her some slack. Jeremy Stone tells his wife that he'll take care of it. When Dr. Stone introduces himself, the captain compares Stone's face to a photograph he's carrying. Dr. Jeremy Stone is played by Arthur Hill.
Arthur Hill was born in Saskatchewan, Canada on August 1, 1922. He was poised to follow in his lawyer father's footsteps. He began pre-law studies at the University of British Columbia, and he supported himself by working as a radio actor with the Canadian Broadcasting Company. He was drafted into the Royal Canadian Air Force as a mechanic during World War II. After the war, he returned to university, finished his bachelor's degree and began studying law. Arthur moved to England in 1948 and appeared on stage as well as radio, film, and television. He took a part and won a Tony in the Broadway performance of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Following the Andromeda Strain, Hill starred as Owen Marshall, counselor at law. Arthur Hill died of Alzheimer's on October 22, 2006 in Los Angeles. He was 84.
The captain gives the code, "There's a fire, sir."
Up its lead.
For God's sakes, Jeremy.
And just like that, Dr. Stone gets in the limo with them. Captain Morton hands Dr. Stone a top-secret file labeled Project Scoop. Back at the house, Allison Stone calls her father, a senator.
Allison?
As she begins to describe what has happened, a beeping interrupts the conversation.
The connection has been broken for reasons of national security.
Meanwhile, in that limo, Dr. Stone is reading up on Project Scoop. The satellite was sent into space to look for any organisms that might exist there. Interesting. They'd chartered an entire TWA airliner to ferry the doctor from San Francisco to who knows where. Dr. Stone quips that he feels like Onassis, that business magnate who married Jackie Kennedy. It's fortunate that Universal was also filming the blockbuster Airplane, making an airliner set readily available. All they had to do was replace the Trans Global Airlines headrest covers with TWA covers. Some theaters ran the Andromeda Strain and Airport as a double bill. At more than 2 hours each, that's one long movie sitting. Dr. Stone gets a call from General Sparks, played by Peter Hobbs. He had scores of screen credits. He played Peter Ames in more than 5,000 episodes of The Secret Storm. All members of the team have been called in, with one exception. Professor Kirk is in the hospital having an appendectomy. We cut to the home of Dr. Charles Dutton, played by David Wayne.
David Wayne was born Wayne James McMeekan in Michigan on January 30, 1914. Wayne was rejected by the U.S. Army, so he volunteered as an ambulance driver for the British. Once the U.S. entered the war, he was accepted. He was listed as killed in action in North Africa. After the war, Wayne won his first Tony Award on Broadway. He worked with Judy Garland and did 4 films with Marilyn Monroe. He performed in more than 100 productions until his retirement in 1993. David Wayne died on February 9, 1995.
His wife, Clara, is played by longtime soap actress Frances Reed. She's getting ready to pack his suitcase while his daughter hands him a cup of coffee. When he tells Clara not to pack, that he won't be needing anything, her response is a bit off the wall.
He's going to a love-in.
I have to laugh. The term love-in was actually coined by KTLA-AM late-night jock and co-founder of the Firesign Theater comedy group, Peter Bergman. I've only been a Firesign Theater fan since 1974, and I have a special planned for the 50th anniversary of my discovering the guys. But back to the movie. Dr. Dutton's grandson comes in and says there are men with guns outside.
Honey, you've been dreaming.
Now, those guys are Army types, as we see when they disperse, and we can see U.S. Army stenciled on the car door. Meanwhile, Dr. Ruth Levitt tells an Air Force major,
"Get someone else."
Dr. Levitt is played by the talented Kate Reid.
Daphne Kate Reid was born in London, England to Canadian parents on November 4, 1930. Born with deformed feet, Kate had corrective surgery at the age of 8. She broke both ankles and a knee in a fall at the age of 14. This kept her home, where she read books and became interested in drama. She acted in summer stock and the Stratford Festival to hone her acting skills. She did some television beginning in the mid-1950s. She was also successful on Broadway beginning in 1962. Kate did scores of screen performances until her death on March 27, 1993 at age 62.
She's definitely no Raquel Welch. She lights a cigarette, starts to look weak, and sits down. Her lab tech, Bess, played by Midori, gets water and a pill for the doctor. The major suggests that if she's ill, If a physician certifies that she's unable to continue, she says she's fine and agrees to go with them. Next, a surgeon is just about to make an incision on a patient's abdomen. He's interrupted by orders to break scrub. In this scene, we notice a bearded man in scrubs on the right of the screen. He is novel writer Michael Crichton, who was given a cameo in the film. He's seated in this scene because of his extremely tall stature. The surgeon who was pulled from surgery is Dr. Mark Hall, played here by James Olsen.
James Olsen was born on October 8, 1930 in Illinois. He started performing on stage in a children's theater at the age of 12. He graduated from Northwestern University and spent a few years as an Army MP. James did some stage acting in Chicago before moving to New York. He honed his acting skills on Broadway before heading west to Hollywood. He was busy performing on the big screen as well as television until 1990. James Olsen died on April 17, 2022.
A UH-1 Iroquois helicopter lifts off from Vandenberg carrying the pilot, Dr. Stone, and Dr. Hall. Dr. Hall wants to know why he was chosen for the team. Dr. Stone mentions the odd man hypothesis, and Hall doesn't seem to know what that means. Stone wonders if the man's been reading his material. We cut to a future Senate committee hearing. Vermont Senator Phillips is played by Eric Christmas, who I recognize from the Philadelphia Experiment, just one of his many roles. Senator McKenzie of New Mexico is played by David McLean, the Marlboro Man in cigarette ads, who was kept busy performing in westerns and soap operas. Back in the helicopter, the men look like astronauts. They do a flyover and drop gas canisters to kill the buzzards, avoiding the spread of the deadly germ. Dempsey, their chopper pilot, is played by real-life helicopter pilot and movie stuntman James W. Gavin. I didn't recognize his face, but in looking over his list of appearances, I'm certain that I've seen him in more than a few productions. He's told not to land, just to hover while the docs climb down a ladder. Now that stunt wasn't shown. The men drop the ladder, look poised to climb out, then we cut to a cloud of dust and they're suddenly in the streets of Piedmont. They wait for the dust to settle before exploring. They discover a dead man here, a boy and his dog lying there, kids who had been playing basketball, people of every age, everyone cut down in mid-stride. The doctors look through windows at a barber shop. The man's in the chair, the barber's on the floor. In an unusual perspective, a close-up of a face with a suited doctor looking in from a doorway. It's nice camera work, but it's so close that I noted a slight twitch of the actor's face. In one house, a woman had lived long enough to write a suicide note before hanging herself. Most of them died instantly, but a few of them had time to go quietly nuts. When they find the van to track the satellite, Hall notices that there's no bleeding from any of the wounds.
There isn't any bleeding.
The beacon signal leads them to Dr. Benedict, played by Jason Johnson. We've probably seen him in quite a few things over the years. Hall and Stone locate the scoop satellite on a table in the doctor's office.
Well, the damn fool opened it.
Hall lays the corpse face down, pulls the pants down and says, "Have a look at his buttocks."
That's not funny.
Well, it wasn't meant to be. Due to lividity, the buttocks should be purple, but it isn't. Hall cuts the man's wrist and red powder pours out. It's clotted blood. When James Olsen mentioned 5 quarts of blood, I was reminded of my review of the 1975 TV movie Strange New World. There, he tries to extract 5 quarts of blood from John Saxon's character, Dylan Hunt. Stone theorizes a single organism could do it. They gather up the scoop satellite and head for the van, and that's when Hall hears a baby crying. They wave off that helicopter and follow the sound to the crying baby. A survivor. That's a major break. Hall loads the baby onto a Stokes basket, and Stone hoists it up. Hall hears someone shouting. He's so startled that he falls down. A man in a white robe approaches him carrying a cleaver, of all things. Hall asks what happened, and then the man collapses. We see a final view of Piedmont as that helicopter flies away.
The town must be neutralized immediately.
In the White House Situation Room, Dr. Robertson is played by Kermit Murdoch. Star Trek fans will recognize him as the prosecutor who helped Captain Kirk avoid a witch hunt in All Our Yesterdays. He's waiting for the president's decision, but the president requires a briefing first. Before they get the briefing written, however, they get a call.
Yes, Mr. President. The president's decided to postpone Directive 712.
Dr. Dutton is driving a blue sedan across the desert. Dr. Levitt complains about the bumpy ride. She lights up a smoke and Dutton tells her to enjoy it. It'll be her last. They pull up to the gate. Behind the fence, tractors are working a barley field.
It's a great place to grow pot.
Levitt shields her eyes as she passes flashing red lights. Dutton takes note of it, but she laughs it off. Inside, they exchange a few coded passphrases. They're buzzed in, and they enter a storage closet full of ortho products. They descend on a secret elevator. Meanwhile, Hall and Stone are still in their environmental suits, pending decontamination. Dutton and Levitt have their palms read, and they're cleared to level 1. The walls are red on this level. Once they're finished filming all of the level 1 scenes, the Union boys will come in and paint the set to get ready for the next level scenes. The team joins up in the hallway. Dr. Stone is expecting a message, so they go straight to the communications center. Sergeant Burke, played by Joe DeRita, tells them there are no messages. In the men's locker room, Hall voices his aversion to Levitt being on the team. Later, in a conference room, Stone presents Hall with a red key on a chain. He is the odd man. Stone uses a silver key to arm a nuclear device that will be automatically triggered if there's danger of the infection spreading. Hall's key is the only way to stop it within 5 minutes of activation. Hall asks, "Why me?"
Should have done your homework, sport.
Stone shows Hall a 3D depiction of the facility. That's Douglas Trumbull's work there. Hall needs to memorize the location of the key stations. Next, they do a video check of the old man and the baby. They are in isolation chambers on their way down to level 5. It will take the team 16 hours of decontamination to get to that level. Hall ponders the nuclear substation. They burn their clothes and head au naturel to decontamination. There's more nudity in a G-rated film. They push the envelope. Dutton suggests that the organism might be an attempt at communication by extraterrestrial beings. Once they're irradiated, they exit to level 2, where the sets are now yellow. A recorded female voice instructs them to sit in a chair in a certain position. Dr. Hall finds it humorous.
Yes, dear.
They're scanned and probed in many ways. Hall's hand scan also seems similar to Strange New World. They get booster shots. The yellow jumpsuits are incinerated on level 3. They enter a station that burns away body hair and the upper layer of skin. I could use that on the hair on my back. A helmet protects the face and the head. It's bad enough that James Olsen had to have his chest shaved for the scene. Can you imagine if they all had to shave their heads too? I'm thinking Star Trek's Ilia. They proceed to the next level, now with gray walls. Dr. Stone can't shake the images of Piedmont from his head. The others are suffering from similar sleep deprivation. Dr. Hall is awakened by an alluring female voice. For a second, he panics when he can't find his key. Well, it had slipped to his back. Over breakfast, and I use that term loosely, they discuss procedure, and they insert suppositories before going to level 5. Dutton explains to Hall that the patients are isolated. There will be no direct contact. I can't believe it took me all this time to realize that Hall is only there for exposition. Those characters would have unnecessary conversations only for our benefit otherwise. Dutton explains the use of a glove box. They enter main control where Dr. Stone is using mechanical hands. He opens an access panel on the capsule. They want to determine if the biological agent is still present and active. When Dutton says use a buffalo, I was confused. I must have always glossed over that line. I admit I had never heard of a buffalo rat, typically used in cancer studies. They expose a caged lab rat to the air inside the chamber. It dies within seconds. Although it was shot under the supervision of the ASPCA, I have always found this next scene to be very disturbing. They performed the same test with a rhesus monkey. For filming purposes, the monkey's airtight cage contained breathable air. When the cage was opened in a room full of carbon dioxide, the monkey blacked out. Assistant Director James Fargo was in there wearing scuba gear and waiting just off camera with a breathing apparatus for the monkey. His reflection appears in the background as he moves in a bit too soon. He revived the monkey. It's still difficult to watch, though. Dutton will examine the animals, while Stone and Levitt concentrate on the capsule. Hall looks in on his two survivors, who are under the care of Karen Anson, who begins to stand as if she's about to introduce herself. Hall immediately starts grilling her. I don't get his antagonistic demeanor toward her. Karen Anson is played by Paula Kelly, who appeared in Soylent Green and as Ginger Jones on 24 episodes of the television series Santa Barbara. Karen provides the exposition to move the scene along, and they jump into the suits to go to work. She'll draw blood while he does the medical exams. Meanwhile, Stone and Levitt are examining the scoop capsule. They disagree on whether to start on the outside or the inside of the capsule. In the autopsy lab, Dutton stops a tech who's about to hook a hose to the rat cage. They'll use the hands. He's Toby, played by Ken Swafford, who was all over television screens from the early 60s through the late 90s. He continued to do voice work until his death in 2018. They hook a tube from the dead rat's cage to a live rat's cage. That rat dies. Then they hook up a filter, and they try it on another rat. There's no effect at 100 angstroms. Whatever it is, it's larger than a virus. Dutton tries 1 micron. At 2 microns, the rat dies. Dutton reports his findings to Stone and Levitt. Stone says it's big enough to be a complete cell, and Levitt adds that there's a good chance it's alive. With this new information, the two decide to key in on the inside of the capsule. Meanwhile, Hall is examining the old man. The severely anemic man says his name is Jackson. He's played by George Mitchell in one of his last roles. He died in 1972. To find out how Andromeda is transmitted, they're going to off another rhesus. The organism is absorbed into the lungs and it spreads quite quickly, clotting all of the blood. Dr. Levitt is tiring of the tedious task of scanning by hand. Then Stone notices something.
At the edge of that shadow.
He sees an indentation. Levitt says it's about the size of a pencil point.
Go to 40.
There's something there.
Go to 60.
They decide to increase magnification to 60.
Maybe it's just a grain of sand.
At 80 power, it looks similar to a tiny igneous rock that's been spattered by green paint. There's more green on the cone's mesh. They examine the rock and the mesh at 100 power. They go to 440 and focus on the rock. Stone moves close to the monitor to point out a detail, and when he turns away, the spatter changes. Ruth rubs her eyes. They are due for a break. But Stone wants to see the spatter at 1,000 first. This time he sees it move.
You didn't change the lighting.
I didn't touch it.
They turn on cameras. I'd have thought they'd already be recording everything, but not in 1971. I guess I'm too spoiled by technological changes that have been made during my lifetime. Their image scanner doesn't go any higher, so Stone is sending the rock to microchemistry. He uses the hands to pick up the grain of sand with tweezers, and he moves it to a petri dish. Meanwhile, Dr. Hall doesn't know why the old man's blood is so acidic. Karen suggests that he ask. Hall jumps into a suit and he starts questioning Mr. Jackson. The man has bleeding stomach ulcers, so he takes aspirin and squeeze to ease the pain. When Hall asks what squeeze is, Karen has the answer pulled up on the computer. He's a sterno drinker. His acidic blood may have been what saved Jackson. But what about the baby? We cut to a fighter pilot whose oxygen mask is disintegrating. He crashes northwest of Piedmont in Utah. General Sparks is betting on pilot error.
Pilot error.
He's surprised that the wildfire team hasn't complained, so he tells the lieutenant to run a comms check.
Check with wildfire message.
Everything checks out. At the Senate hearing, it would come out that there was something wrong, though.
You're saying Stone's $90 million facility, which you recommended, was knocked out by a sliver of paper?
A sliver of paper between the bell and the striker disabled the bell. Back at that crash site, all rubber had disintegrated. Major Manchek asks if Wildfire was informed. The answer is yes. It went out on the scrambler. In the microchemistry lab at Wildfire, they discover that the rock and the green stuff are just basic elements. The amino acid analysis data comes back all zeros.
No amino acids.
So they determined that it's not from Earth. At the crash site in Utah, they're looking for pieces of rubber. The pilot's face mask and his body were dissolved by something, meaning there was something in that plane that consumes plastic. Back at Wildfire, Dr. Ruth is reviewing computer images of the organism's growth cultures. It's getting late, and she's tired. Stone reminds her of a midnight conference. One petri dish shows no growth. That red flashing must be some sort of a trigger for her. Remember how she shielded her eyes earlier? In the patient isolation booth, Mr. Jackson pats Karen Hansen's ass. Should she put in for hazard pay?
Feeling better, aren't you, Mr. Jackson?
Jackson says the baby's name is Manuel Rios. He cries constantly. Manuel is played by infant Robert Soto in his first role. Meanwhile, Dr. Levitt is still at the monitor with a blank stare. She comes out of it after her program has ended. Ruth looks at the clock. She restarts at chocolate, probably the last one she remembers seeing. She cuts it short when she's late for the conference. Hall says the correlation between Jackson and the diabetic would be acidosis. He's betting that Levitt found no growth on some of the cultures. Ruth says she's not finished. She doesn't mention her blackout. Stone may have assumed she'd fallen asleep. Dutton suggests that they file for a code name for their organism. Stone goes to a console and he types the request. An answer comes back immediately. Their organism is to be called the Andromeda Strain.
Andromeda's our
Stone. They didn't drop the bomb. Stone gets in touch with Sergeant Burke, who says there was no message. The bell never went off. He contacts Dr. Robertson. It's about time they checked in. They missed several messages, including the one about the Phantom jet.
Any thoughts about the Phantom crash?
Stone pushes them hard to get the 712 nuke ordered. Stone is slicing Andromeda thinner than a Pittsburgh deli slices chipped ham. Levitt has information about the lab cultures, but Stone is too busy to listen. She decides to go to them instead. She enters just as an image is coming up. It looks like a crystal. Hall asks again about the no growth results, and she insists there were none. So did she black out every time she ran that program? Andromeda can grow in a vacuum, therefore it can survive in outer space. It consumes everything, wastes nothing.
Good Lord, what?
A nuclear blast will only feed Andromeda, creating a giant super colony. When Robbie comes on, he's happy that the president had agreed to nuke the town. When the scientists tell him to abort, it doesn't go over too well. But they've just found out Andromeda works like a little reactor. It converts matter to energy and energy to matter. Robertson will order the nuke inside Wildfire to be disabled by morning. Hall pulls out his key, but that won't work until the thing's going. They run a computer growth simulation. Andromeda mutates and it overloads the system. Meanwhile, Hall is holding a bottle over the baby. Karen takes the bottle and prepares to feed it, but Hall insists that she wait. Just then, an alarm sounds, and a yellow light shows below the clocks. People run through the halls. Ruth is running alongside Hall when she slows to a stop. A red light is flashing above the autopsy lab's doorway. A woman notices her, frozen in place. Ruth starts convulsing, and everyone runs, assuming that she's infected. Hall calls for 100 milligrams of phenobarbital. When Karen Anson shows up with the syringe, she stops short. Stone has Dr. Dutton on the monitor. He admits that he's scared. They're pumping pure O2 in, since Andromeda doesn't do well in oxygen. Hall comes in. He tells Stone about the seizure and wonders why she kept her epilepsy secret. Stone has been trying to get Dutton to remain calm, but Hall insists that rapid breathing will be better.
Experiment with your own life, damn it!
Hall orders a blood test on the crying baby. They pull up the data on Andromeda and discover that it only grows within a narrow range of pH. Both Stone and Hall have Dutton breathe rapidly to cause respiratory acidosis. I would have thought he'd be dead by now, based on how the people were cut down in mid-stride at Piedmont. And they notice that one of the buffalo rats is alive, and that rat's been exposed. Stone notices a warning: gaskets are decomposing. Stone yells, "There's no substation in this sector," and before Hall can reach the nearest substation, they're sealed off. Nice. The substation in that area is only roughed in. Hall decides to try accessing another level via the central core. Hall crawls through the access port. There are lasers to stop small animals. Hall will have to climb a ladder. And, by the way, did Stone mention gas? The lasers miss. I imagine an animal could get out. Level 4 is contaminated, so he'll have to try level 3. He has fewer than 3 minutes to get there. A laser hits Hall's cheek. Another laser strike, this time hitting his hand. As he gains access to level 3, he's disoriented. He sees a woman. He asks her where the access panel is, but she runs away. But that's a good thing, because the access panel was right behind her and only visible after she moved. Hall puts his key in the slot. I guess he has to turn it. He reaches up and he twists the key.
Self-destruct has been cancelled.
Next, we see Hall come to on a hospital bed. Karen Anson is standing beside him. He assumes that the bomb didn't go off. Well, duh.
8 seconds to spare.
The Andromeda colony is heading out to sea. If they seed the clouds to make it rain, the alkaline ocean water should kill it. But there's no guarantee that something similar won't still occur. This film was extremely long, which means I had a lot to talk about. It really made me think when I was in 9th grade, and a lot of that thought stuck with me. A couple of final notes. The Andromeda Strain was nominated to be included in the 100 most heart-pounding American films. I guess the first time you see it. The Space Germ special effects cost $250 grand. When Michael Crichton visited Universal Studios, he was given a tour of the studios by Steven Spielberg, an up-and-coming director. He'd only done indie shorts, but the suits thought he showed promise. Some of the random PA announcements are quite comical. Did you notice the one canceling all brakes during the self-destruct countdown? On a serious note, I've been having some difficulty getting movie reviews posted without them being blocked recently. I'm not sure where that leaves the future of the channel. It takes a lot of time to research, record, edit, and produce these reviews, so it's very frustrating to have one blocked. It either means starting over, almost from scratch, to strip out video clips, or abandoning the project altogether. I'd like to thank all the people who watched my stripped review of The Reluctant Astronaut. The viewership numbers for that one surprised me. When I do get my next review up, remember to tap the like button. Also, subscribe, activate the notification bell, and don't get a sliver of paper stuck. That way you'll know when I post my next episode of Old Joe's Reminiscence.